You remember the moment. Maybe it was a person across a room. Maybe it was someone you'd known for years who suddenly looked different. Maybe it arrived quietly over weeks, until one day you realized it had already happened, that something had shifted inside you in a direction you didn't choose and couldn't reverse. You called it love. Of course you did. That's what it felt like. Warm, specific, undeniable. The feeling that this person mattered in a way that other people didn't. That your life had rearranged itself around a new center of gravity without asking your permission. What if that feeling was manufactured? Not fake, not meaningless, not something to be dismissed or grieved, but manufactured, produced by a brain running a very old program, one that predates language and romance and every story you've ever been told about what love is supposed to be. A program designed not for your happiness, but for your survival. Not to make you feel complete, but to make you useful to something larger than yourself. Machiavelli never wrote a treatise on love. He didn't need to. His entire body of work is an extended observation about what humans actually want beneath what they claim to want, about the gap between the story people tell about their motivations and the machinery running underneath. And when you apply that lens to love, to the feeling most humans treat as the most sacred and least examined part of their lives, something interesting happens. The sacred starts to look like a strategy. Modern neuroscience has spent decades mapping what happens in the brain during romantic attachment. The findings are extraordinary, and they are almost never discussed honestly, because what they reveal sits in uncomfortable tension with everything we've built our culture around. Love is not a feeling you discover. It is a state your brain constructs. And it constructs it for reasons. Specific, traceable, unsentimental reasons. Machiavelli would not be surprised. He would simply ask the question nobody wants to answer. If your brain manufactured it, what was it manufacturing it for? Let's start with what the brain actually does. When you experience what you call love, romantic love specifically, the acute, consuming, early-stage variety, 3 neurochemical systems activate simultaneously. Dopamine floods the reward circuits, producing the obsessive focus and euphoria associated with new attachment. Norepinephrine generates the heightened alertness, the racing heart, the sense that everything is slightly more vivid than usual. And serotonin drops measurably, significantly, to levels that researchers have compared to those found in people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. That last part is worth staying with. The neurochemical signature of falling in love includes a reduction in the brain chemical most associated with contentment and rational perspective. You are, in the most literal biological sense, less stable, less objective, and more compulsive when you are in love than when you are not. The brain has deliberately narrowed your focus, heightened your fixation, and reduced your capacity for dispassionate evaluation, all in service of a single target. This is not romance. This is recruitment. The brain is recruiting you into an attachment, and it is doing so by temporarily suspending the faculties that might allow you to evaluate whether that attachment is actually in your interest. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who relies on love alone for loyalty is building on sand, because love is contingent, emotional, and subject to change the moment circumstances shift. What he was describing is precisely this. Love, as a neurochemical state, is designed for initiation, not duration. It pulls you towards someone with extraordinary force, and then, inevitably, it changes. The dopamine normalizes. The obsessive focus softens. The serotonin returns. And what's left? What the relationship actually is once the manufactured state has stabilized is something much more structural, much more Machiavellian, a set of agreements, explicit and implicit, about what each person will provide, what each person needs, what each person is willing to tolerate, and what they are not. Anthropologist Helen Fisher, who has spent decades studying the neuroscience of love, identifies 3 distinct brain systems involved in mating: lust, attraction, and attachment. Each runs on different neurochemistry. Each serves a different evolutionary function, and crucially, they do not always activate for the same person simultaneously. What this means is that what you experience as the single unified feeling of love is actually a coalition of separate biological programs, each with its own agenda, running in parallel and producing a combined output your conscious mind interprets as one thing. The feeling of unity, of this is the person, this is what love is itself a construction. The brain's narrative layer, stitching together several distinct drives into a story that feels like destiny. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. He spent his career watching people act on manufactured certainty, on the conviction that what they felt was true, that their perceptions were accurate, that their loyalties were freely chosen, while the actual mechanisms driving their behavior operated entirely below the surface of awareness. He wasn't cynical about this. He was precise about it. And the precision leads somewhere uncomfortable. If love is a coalition of biological programs producing a unified feeling, then what you fell in love with was never entirely the other person. It was what the other person activated in you, and those are not the same thing. Here is what happens after the neurochemistry stabilizes. The dopamine normalizes. The obsessive early-stage focus softens into something more habitual. The person who once occupied every available corner of your attention becomes, gradually, a known quantity. Still important, still valued, but no longer neurologically novel in the way that produced those first acute months of feeling. Most people experience this as loss, as the relationship becoming less than it was, as love fading. What is actually happening is that the brain is transitioning between systems. From the attraction system, high dopamine, high fixation, high instability, to the attachment system, which runs on different chemistry entirely, oxytocin, vasopressin, the neurochemicals associated not with pursuit, but with bonding, with the specific comfort of a known person, with the particular pain of losing someone your nervous system has integrated as familiar. This is a calmer state, a more durable one. But it is also, stripped of its romantic framing, something very specific. It is the brain encoding another person as a resource, as something whose presence is associated with safety, and whose absence is associated with threat. This is where Machiavelli becomes directly relevant, because what the attachment system is maintaining, beneath the language of love, beneath the felt sense of connection and meaning, is a bilateral arrangement. Each person in the relationship is providing something the other's nervous system has come to depend on: comfort, stability, identity confirmation, physical presence, the specific texture of being known by someone over time. These are not cynical things. They are real and profound, but they are also, and this is the part that sits uncomfortably, transactional in their structure. The relationship persists because it is meeting needs. And when it stops meeting needs, on either side, in ways large or small, the attachment begins to erode, not because love has died, because the contract has been breached. Machiavelli wrote about the fragility of relationships built on affection alone, and the relative stability of relationships built on mutual interest. Not because he believed interest was more noble than affection, but because interest is more honest about what a relationship actually is. Two people, each with needs, each providing something, each calculating. Not coldly, not consciously, but calculating nonetheless whether the arrangement continues to serve them. Modern relationship psychology has arrived at remarkably similar conclusions through very different language. John Gottman's decades of research on couples identified that successful long-term relationships are characterized not by the absence of conflict or the persistence of romantic feeling, but by a specific ratio of positive to negative interactions, a kind of ongoing emotional accounting that determines whether the implicit contract feels honored or violated. The couples who stay together are not the ones who never stop feeling love in the acute neurochemical sense. They are the ones who maintain a viable arrangement, who continue, consciously or not, to make the contract worth keeping. This should reframe something for you. Every relationship you have ever been in, every one you called love, had a structure beneath the feeling, terms that were never written down, but were always operative, lines that, when crossed, changed everything, conditions that, when no longer met, ended it. The feeling was real. The contract was always there too. You just weren't looking at it. There is a reason this framing disturbs people. It is not because it is wrong. It disturbs people because accepting it requires dismantling a story that does enormous psychological work. The story that love is the one domain of human experience that exists outside strategy, outside calculation, outside the ordinary machinery of self-interest. We need that story. It serves a function. The belief that love is unconditional, that genuine attachment transcends transaction, that somewhere in the architecture of human connection, there is a space that is purely, cleanly about the other person. This belief makes certain kinds of vulnerability possible. It makes people willing to open themselves in ways that pure strategic thinking would never permit. Machiavelli would not ask you to abandon that. He would ask you to see it clearly, because the danger is not in having the feeling. The danger is in using the feeling as a reason not to examine the structure, in treating love as self-explanatory, as something that requires no further analysis because it is love, and love is its own justification. That is where people get hurt, not by loving, but by refusing to look at what they are actually inside when they call it love. The neuroscience supports this. Research on what psychologists call limerence, the acute obsessive state of early romantic attachment, consistently shows that people in this state overestimate similarity with their partner, underestimate conflict, and attribute the source of their well-being to the other person rather than to their own neurochemical state. They are, in a measurable sense, not seeing the person they love. They are seeing a projection, a screen onto which their activated attachment system is casting the qualities it needs to find. This is not a character flaw. It is the program running as designed. But it means that many of the most consequential decisions people make, who to build a life with, who to trust with their vulnerability, who to allow into the architecture of their identity, are made from inside a state specifically engineered to bypass careful evaluation. Machiavelli's deepest insight about power was that the most dangerous position is the one where you believe you are acting freely while actually being managed. The most effective control is invisible control. The manipulation that doesn't feel like manipulation, because it feels like choice, like feeling, like love. The brain manufacturing love is not your enemy, but it is also not your ally in the project of choosing well. It is running its own agenda, an evolutionary agenda written long before you existed, optimizing for reproduction and survival, indifferent to your happiness or your self-knowledge or the specific texture of the life you are trying to build. To love well, to choose with any degree of clarity who deserves the access that love grants, you have to be able to look at the machinery while it is running, to feel the feeling, and simultaneously ask what it is doing. what it is recruiting you toward, what the contract underneath it actually says. Most people never do this, not because they lack the capacity, because the feeling is so convincing that examining it feels like a betrayal of it, and that conviction, that love must not be examined to remain love, is the most elegant feature of the program. It protects itself from scrutiny by making scrutiny feel like sin. None of this means love isn't real. It means love is real in the way that all constructed things are real, in the way that language is real, that identity is real, that meaning is real. These things are made. They are produced by biological and social systems operating beneath conscious awareness, and the fact that they are made does not make them less true. It makes them more interesting, more worth examining, more worth choosing carefully, rather than simply falling into and calling it fate. Machiavelli's gift, if you can call it that, is the refusal to let sentiment substitute for understanding. He watched human beings arrange themselves around power, around love, around loyalty, around fear. And he described what he saw without flinching, not to make them feel worse about themselves, but to give them a more accurate map of the territory they were already moving through. The territory of love is not what the story says it is. It is not a feeling that arrives from outside you, that selects you, that means something cosmic about who you are and who you're meant to be with. It is a state your brain produces, for reasons, for materials it gathered from your history, from your earliest attachments, your unmet needs, your conditioned sense of what safety and belonging feel like. The person who activates it is not its source, they are its occasion. And here is what that means, practically, in a way Machiavelli would approve of. If you want to love well, if you want to build something real rather than something neurochemically convincing, you have to eventually ask the question. The feeling is designed to prevent you from asking, not whether you love them. That question answers itself. But what you are loving them for, what they are providing that your nervous system has decided it cannot do without. What the contract actually says, beneath the feeling, in the language the brain uses when it is being honest, because that contract is going to govern the relationship, whether you read it or not. The only question is whether you signed it consciously, or whether the brain just forged your signature and handed you the feeling as a receipt.